Welcome back. Most people should have started Chapter 8 by now, so let's begin looking at the content of Chapter 8. We are exploring looping in Chapter 8. We've already seen the for loop, how the for loop allows us to iterate through the items of a list and even through the letters of a string. Now we're going to be introduced to another kind of loop called the while loop. Now the while loop is similar to an if statement. If you look at an if statement, you have a condition, and if that condition is true, then you carry out certain instructions. So in this case, we see count is equal to 0. If count is less than or equal to 5, print out the following statement, and indeed it is less than 5, so it will be printed. In the case of a while statement, well, count is less than 0 or is less than 10, so we will print out the following statement, and then we will increment count to 1. We're starting with count equal to 0, and then we add 1 to the count, making it 1, and then we repeat. If 1 is less than 10, repeat the statement again, increment count, count becomes 2. So we're going to repeat or print out this statement 10 times. Now, look at the following. If I remove this increment part, this is an infinite loop. This condition will always evaluate to true. So this statement here will be printed over and over again with no end. So make sure that when you create a while loop, that while loop either evaluates to false at some point, or you put a break statement in there, and we will look at the break statement very shortly. So if this condition is always true and there is no break statement, we've created an infinite loop. Let's go on to section 2. So we're creating a loop condition. We're making it true. So will we enter the loop? Well, if it's true, we enter the loop. If it's false, we do not enter the loop. But in this case, it's true. So we enter the loop. We print out the following statement, and then we have to make the looping condition false. Otherwise, we'll just keep printing out that statement over and over again. In section 3, we initialize number to 1, and then we use that number to see if we're going to enter the loop. Is 1 less than or equal to 10? Well, it is. So we enter the loop, and then we're going to square that number and print it to the console. And we have an incrementer here, so we're going to make the 1 a 2, and we repeat. We're going to square 2, that's going to be 4, and repeat. 3 squared is 9. In fact, we're going to square all the numbers 1 through 10. So let's go to section, well, we'll leave that for now. You can do that in the exercise. That will print out the numbers 1 through 100. In section 4, we're prompting a user for information. Are you enjoying the course? Enter Y or N, and those are the only valid choices. How can we test to see that the user entered a valid choice? Well, we can do that right in the while statement. So if the choice is not equal to, remember this operator here means not equal to, if choice is not equal to Y, or it's not equal to N, then you're going to prompt the user again. In fact, you're going to keep prompting the user until they finally enter a valid choice of Y or N. In section 5, we have an example of an infinite loop. Okay, so to prevent from looping forever, make sure your while statement is terminated with a colon at the end. And here's the problem that's being presented. This condition will always evaluate to true. Okay, so it's going to keep looping and it's going to keep printing the number 0 over and over again. The only way we can prevent this from being an infinite loop is by introducing the following incrementer, which will increase every time through each iteration. In section 6, we enter the loop because we have a true condition. We're just putting it out there, true. So we're guaranteed to enter the loop. Okay, and what are we going to do? We are going to print out the number count. Well, count is currently 0. We're going to increment count, and we're going to loop. In fact, this would be an infinite loop if it weren't for this last part here, because the condition is always going to be true. How do we prevent this from being an infinite loop? We need to break out of it. Now remember, there are 2 ways to get out of a while loop. Either the condition has to be false, in this case it will never be false, or we have to introduce a break. Now let's see how the break works. If count is greater than or equal to 10, well then break out of the loop. Well, eventually, if we keep adding 1 to the count, eventually it's going to be, this statement here will be true, and we will be able to break out. Now, this part is important here. This if is inside the while loop. If we pull it outside the while loop, then it's a separate entity altogether, and this part here will loop forever. To avoid that from happening, in Python, and I'm not a big fan of this, in Python you have to indent. Okay, so we have to make sure the if is internal to the while loop or nested inside the while loop with indentation. Other programming languages, the indentation means nothing, but with Python, the indentation means something. So you have to have it properly indented, and if you forget to indent, you do something like this, you will create an infinite loop. In section 7, we're importing the random number library, and we're going to generate 3 random numbers from it. Here is the random number function that generates random numbers between 1 and 6. And if that number happens to be 5, we're going to print the following statement, you lose, and we're going to break out of the loop. Now, how many times are we going to do this? We're going to loop 3 times, and that's the condition we have in the while statement. While count is less than or equal to 3, loop. And every time we loop or run an iteration of the while loop, we're going to increment it by 1. Eventually, this condition is going to be false, and when this condition becomes false and we have an else clause, that else will be executed. So in this case, we will print you win. So how does the game work? Well, we have to generate 3 numbers, and if one of them is 5, you lose. Otherwise, you win. Now here we have to exercise a little bit of caution, because again, this else is not part of the if. If I pull it in like that, I see it is indented with the if, and the while loop will ignore it. It will not be part of the while. So to prevent that from happening, we have to make sure else is evaluated with while. Now, why is it part of while? Well, we have a condition here. While this condition is true, do the following, and once this condition becomes false, then you're going to do this part down here.